What do you understand by formal, dynamic and pragmatic equivalence, and how useful do you find these terms in describing and analysing the translation process? The concept of equivalence has been controversial for centuries. From the age of Cicero, it is documented that there were two translation approaches in use, either word for word, a faithful approach, or sense for sense. Schleiermacher in the 19th century advocated two approaches. Either the translator should leave the writer in peace as much as possible and move the reader towards him, or that he should leave the reader in peace as much as possible and move the writer towards him. In the 1960s, a new, much more scientific approach was devised and delivered by Eugene Nida. Nida based his theories on the study of pragmatics and semantics and the work done by Noam Chomsky. Nida delivered terms which would replace that of literal, free or faithful translation and present new models, that of formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. This novel approach by Nida laid great weight on the importance of transferring meaning of the lexis rather than the grammatical form. Formal equivalence is where attention is focused on the message itself, and the translation is strongly oriented towards the structure and lexis of the source text. Academia is really suited to this form of translation, and often it yields what is known as a gloss translation, accompanied by scholarly footnotes. It is suited to academic translational environments because of the requirement for understanding of both the original source and the culture and history attached to it. The objectives of formal equivalence are to deliver as close a representation of the form and the content of the original as possible. Nida adopted the central theme of moving away from the idea that words have fixed meanings towards a functional definition of meaning in which a word acquires its meaning through its context. This became known later as a functional equivalence and is based on the equivalent effect where the relationship between receptor and message should be substantially the same as that which existed between the original receptor and the message. This is what Munday calls the receptacle-oriented approach, and he considers adjustments of grammar, lexical and cultural references to be essential to achieve naturalness. For Nida, the success of the translation depends above all on achieving equivalence of effect or response, and in summary he considers that correspondence in meaning takes priority over correspondence in style if equivalent effect is to be achieved. There were objections to Nida's theories, and the main objection appears to centre around the idea of what is effect and how it can be measured objectively. In addition, the term equivalence itself has come under some scrutiny, and since the time of Nida, scholars have rejected, in some cases, the notion that equivalence has any kind of foundation. Pym himself said it should be rejected as having no ontological foundation. Important work was done by Werner Koller in Germany on defining equivalences and their relationships in order specifically to help the translator to find the right equivalence in a communicative situation. The equivalences he proposed are hierarchically ordered, and the translator may try one, and if this is inadequate, may have to seek equivalence at a higher level. Peter Newmark proposed two models of equivalence, semantic and communicative. Semantic is different from a faithful or word-for-word translation in that it takes account of aesthetic values of the source text, and communicative attempts to render the exact contextual meaning of the original so that both content and language are readily acceptable and comprehensible. However, Newmark does not adopt Nida's effect, as it is, in his words, inoperant if the text is out of TL, space and time. Hattem and Mason agree that dynamic equivalence seems to be the norm. Pragmatic equivalence is a way of identifying how utterances are used in communicative situations, according to Baker. Mason defines it as translating involves texts as sets of relevant intentions in which users presuppose, implicate, and infer meaning. And Hickey defines it as the pragmatic level is neither purely theoretical nor relevant merely to specific translation problems, but common across all translation. Mona Baker defines three concepts which make up pragmatics as coherence, presupposition, and implicature, and I will go on to deal with each of these three in a little more detail now. Coherence is the network of conceptual relations which underlie the surface text. It is the linking mechanism of words and expressions, and is the way in which texts make sense to a reader. Critically, it's going to vary from reader to reader, because coherence, according to its definition, relies upon the worldly experience of the reader or the listener to make sense of a stretch of text. The speaker actually conveys, according to the coherence theory, more than is actually written or spoken in the words delivered, and the receiver interprets more in what he or she reads or hears than what has been delivered. Implicature refers to what the speaker means or implies, rather than what has been said or written. Take a look at the examples on the screen. Is that the best you can do? The implicature here is, this is a poor piece of work. The second example, what time do you call this? Implicitly here, you're late, very late, and an answer to the what time is this is not required. The third example, shall we take a walk? And the answer, it's raining, gives an implicit no to the question asked. So the study of pragmatics, and specifically conversational implicature, can help us to read more into what has been written or said in order to understand and better to translate the actual meaning of what is in the source text. It can also help us to remove ambiguity, and if one knows more about the context, who is speaking, the type of text it is, and the environment, then ambiguity may be reduced or removed. Paul Grice in 1975 has developed a set of rules, the cooperative principle, that operate in a normal cooperative conversation. These are quantity, which is where you give out information that is necessary, but do not give too much or too little. Quality, say only what you know to be true or what you can support. Relevance, what you say should be relevant to the conversation. And manner, say what you need to say in a way that is appropriate to the message you wish to convey, and which normally should be understood by the receiver. Presupposition is closely related to coherence, and alongside implicature is assuming a preeminent place in semantics and pragmatics, according to Christopher Potts. Monday relates it to the linguistic and extra-linguistic knowledge the sender assumes the reader to have, as in the example, the bulletin was announced by number 10. In order to understand the meaning of this, the receiver would need to have an understanding that number 10 relates to the home of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So how useful are Nida's terms? After centuries of debate, confusion, and lack of clarity, the introduction of Nida's terms brought translation into the more systematic realm of science. Translation theory was drawn from a stagnant, literal versus free debate, and his theories added method to the translation process. In addition, the definitions of formal and dynamic equivalence helped translators to understand that a complex semantic word is conditioned by context, and it placed the receiver firmly in the center of the equation and laid the foundations for a new systematic linguistic suite of models to clarify and rationalize the translation process. So how useful is pragmatic equivalence to the translator? As we've seen, pragmatics is concerned with how language is used in communication, and pragmatic equivalence is important to the translator in that it focuses on specific aspects such as intentionality of meaning, or the way a phrase or sentence is conventionally expressed in different languages, the expectations of listeners and readers, and the interactions between utterances and the knowledge of the world and the context of the utterance. These are aspects which play an important role in making decisions in the translation process, and pragmatic equivalence suggests that the context and the speaker need to be recognized in order to help the deciphering of an ambiguous text. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to receiving your comments.